All right, crypto regulation could be the theme that is starting to play out not only here in the United States, globally. We've already talked quite a bit about MiCA and many other things that are happening around the world. But I think all eyes are on DC now, primarily because of what we're seeing, not only from some of the hearings, some of the committees that are being formed. So we thought, let's get a little deeper on this and get into what the Blockchain Association is doing and maybe get some more insights on this. So I think you guys are going to like this one. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into TechPath. Joining me today is Ron Hammond, who is the Director of Government Affairs over at the Blockchain Association. Great to have you, Ron.
Thanks for having me again. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Last time you were on, we had a chance to kind of deep dive primarily in the framework of what was happening in DC. Who were the players? All of that seems to be playing out now. We get a little bit more awareness. Obviously, there's been a ramp up in terms of interest in DC around blockchain legislation as a whole. This is going to be talking about stablecoins, all that kind of stuff. I want to get into a few questions on the first topic, and that is really going into this whole issue with Coinbase. Coinbase, of course, publicly traded company. Many people think this is, absolutely insane that we're seeing a Wells notice getting served to Coinbase. And you look at a few people that look at it and say, hey, listen, we think that this is a bad move for Coinbase to do a suit to the SEC. I wanted to play a clip for you. This was actually Kevin O'Leary. And I'm going to play this right here for you.
I thought one of the biggest mistakes of recent was Coinbase litigating the SEC. That sounds like a really bad idea. That does not advance the industry in any way. It makes institutional shareholders cringe that they would be shareholders in Coinbase and be litigating their regulator. Very bad political move. And if I were a shareholder of Coinbase, and I'm not, I would let my displeasure known to the board. This is the kind of thing you want to change management for. And I'm certainly not suing them. That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. Yikes. And I've seen lots of stupid ideas, but that is the top of the cherry. That strategy.
All right, so I'm going to pause it there, just the stupidest idea. Of course, we know O'Leary's background with FTX. But my point is that you look at, first of all, any kind of scenario that plays out in the courts or potentially plays out with government entities like the SEC. I just feel like I look at this and I think, well, of course if you have a business, you would defend that business and your practices, regardless of who it is. Doesn't matter if it's the SEC or, the president himself. The point is that if you're right or if you think you're right, that's what the whole idea of the judicial system is to prove yourself in court. What are you seeing around DC around what Coinbase is trying to do right now in terms of their litigation towards the SEC?
Definitely. Here's what I'll say is that at least for Coinbase, we have someone who's sticking up for the industry and fighting. And mind you, there's a lot of groups like the Blockchain Association, Crypto Council for Innovation, and many others. But largely, a lot of these folks are, we're on the lobbying front here. And when it comes to the court cases, it's really important to have someone like Coinbase stand up, especially given the regime that we're having underneath Gary Gensler. There's a lot of enforcement actions, regulation by enforcement. He's now even saying that there is no need for legislation. It's a pivot, actually, for the past year. And so it looks like it's going to be the status quo at the SEC unless something changes through the courts or through Congress. And Coinbase is standing up and saying, we need to have a fight here. Kraken had to settle with the SEC, but Coinbase is actually going forward here. So as an industry participant, I think it's really important to have Coinbase. They're doing a great job, in my opinion, both in the advocacy side, but also on the legal side as well. And I think we also got to remember that the SEC has been messaging consistently that they haven't lost a court case on crypto. That may change this year. The Grayscale case is going in their favor, and the Ripple case, we'll see how that plays out. But these are two big cases, and I think the SEC is going to probably lose at least one of them.
Well, when they say they haven't lost a case, it's typically because they're going after people that are much weaker than them, that cannot sustain a true legal battle, whether you look at the library case or even the situation with Kraken. And that's, to me, that's the bigger scenario playing into this, because it looks as though our government is preying on weak companies or companies that don't necessarily have the means to go in and go head to head. I mean, it literally took Coinbase, the largest exchange essentially in the United States, to basically stand up and say, okay, maybe enough is enough and we need to take a stand right here. When you look at some of the other regulation that is starting to form in DC, stablecoins, of course, are at the top of the hill. How far are we in terms of really good, or at least some stablecoin regulation becoming reality? How close do you think we are right now?
At least at this current moment, it's a little precarious, I'll say. So we do have a bipartisan text that was agreed upon in the fall of 2022. But at the same time, we saw some of the Democrats in the recent stablecoin hearing and the House Financial Service Committee back away from that draft, saying, actually, we need to have a whole new bill. We had a whole new purview of what stablecoin regulation looks like. And currently, right now, the main hangup is what's the role of the state regulators? Should the states have a role in regulating stablecoins, or should it be just federal? And we've seen the Republicans more endorsing the state pathway, but we've seen Democrats be a little more harder in saying, no, we actually believe it's solely federal. Again, not all Democrats, not all Republicans have these views, but I'd say the majority and those actually in the drafting phase here are the ones who are having those arguments right now. But we are seeing some movement. We've seen two versions of the stablecoin regulation bill. One that's been released by Patrick McHenry, been a little more industry friendly, and then we've seen one that's been kind of deal between both of them. Maxine Waters and Patrick McHenry, that's a little more down the middle here. So, and candidly too, I think it's a very balanced bill. So I think we will see some movement actually pretty soon, especially in the House on stablecoin legislation, because there is a need here. And we've seen Congress say that they need to insert their role. And we've also had the administration say Congress needs to lead in this space. Otherwise, regulators will. And that's where we're seeing things like the SEC go after BUSD and Paxos, for example. So I think legislation is important.
So that's interesting with the, because if you look at what happened last week in one of the Senate hearings, and we got a chance to see Filecoin and a lot of really good positioning. I want to talk about that here in a second, but I want to jump back to the stablecoin bill, because if we do get something from a regulatory standpoint rolled out, let's just, hope that in a perfect nirvana that occurs. How much further behind do you feel we would see maybe crypto level or even NFT regulation starting to play into this? If you look at what's happening in the EU, MiCA has a very sophisticated regulation, though it is, I think, even maybe not heavy-handed, but it's definitely pointing at the industry and at least giving some rule sets. How far behind do you think we would see from a regulatory standpoint from a stablecoin bill to a potential crypto and NFT bill?
I mean, I think you hit it, the nail on the head here. We're behind, and that's the truth. And the EU is leading here. And so there's another effort going on right now. So there's the stablecoin bill. That's one effort legislatively. But on the other end, we're seeing market structure, and that's a very broad term. But right now, a lot of the conversation of where's the SEC's role? Where's the CFTC's role? What are the definitions of a digital asset? How do you register with the SEC as a crypto exchange? Those conversations are happening both in public settings and in private settings. You mentioned that hearing that happened last week in the House Financial Service Committee on that topic. But at the same time, there was a House Agriculture Committee hearing at the same content and the same time, focusing on different issues. And so we're going to see that actually play out as well next week. We're going to see a joint hearing on May 10th with the two committees together talking about definitions and such. A, it's really rare, but B, it's a good sign. We've got two committees working together on really substantive things, because you just really can't focus on the SEC or CFT solely. You need to have a framework, and that's what the House is focusing on right now, which is really exciting, which could come into NFTs and many more.
Yeah, okay, so that we did a full breakdown on that hearing last week. We got a chance to see a lot of that. Maxine Waters went on record there basically saying we're going to start from scratch, and I think that was the kind of the layout of the two committees trying to come together within that. Do you feel, and McHenry's on record now saying that he thinks he's going to be able to deliver one from the House to the president, and the idea behind that would have to come, I'm assuming, on some sort of joint effort between those two committees to be able to get a bill through the House. If that were to take place, how likely do you feel that this would make its way in to the president and get signed?
It's one of the most difficult things about any crypto legislation is the Senate Banking Committee. It doesn't matter if it's a Republican in charge or a Democrat in charge. It seems to be a committee that really doesn't move much legislation. They haven't had a markup, which means when they have a vote on the committee, they haven't had one in almost 4 years. So that's always been the barrier for any crypto legislation or any legislation in financial services in general. But that's why it's important that both committees, the Agriculture Committee and Financial Services, are involved, because Senate Agriculture Committee, if you may recall, was working on the DCCPA. That's the bill that SBF was really pushing heavily. And it would have really screwed over the DeFi community, candidly, because it would apply centralized exchange regulation to DeFi, which just wouldn't make sense. But I think we have both, those committees are very active. So while Senate Banking might not be too active on voting on legislation, Senate Agriculture is. And so I definitely think there is a pathway here, and it's a good strategy to get this to the president's desk. But a lot has to happen. And politics has a funny way of messing things up. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that bleed over right now where politics gets in the way, not substance. So we'll see if they can draft that legislation in such a good way to get across the finish line. But a lot still has to be done.
As far as contributing factors here, we've reported a lot on the American banking industry I'll say in trouble right now. We've seen a lot of banks starting to hit some challenges. Do you feel like that or even MiCA getting passed, going into effect later this year, has put pressure on the lawmakers there? Do you feel like that has any contribution at all to how fast they're moving at this point?
Well, there was a narrative early on where folks were blaming crypto for the bank crisis, and that's been disproven both by the regulators as well as banks themselves. And so that narrative died quickly, and that came from a lot of skeptics, candidly, of crypto who were trying to put all the blame on them. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think it's also going to potentially delay legislation just because it is the burning building right now that a lot of folks are focusing on Capitol Hill. So we've seen Senate Banking now has listed several hearings on First Republic and SVB. I think we're going to see some investigations into SVB more from Congress. And then there could be a play here where crypto legislation kind of goes to the back burner. But right now, you've seen the Gary Gensler regime of the SEC. It's really gotten Republicans, especially, geared up to saying, look, we can take on both fires here. We can deal with the bank situation, but we can also move forward on crypto legislation. And a lot of Democrats agree. But again, it's a pretty precarious situation with the banks right now. So we'll see if there's any more contagion effect here. But it is taking up a lot of bandwidth on Capitol Hill at the moment.
With that being the case, then you have Senator Warren. I mean, this is a good example. This is one of her tweets. Elizabeth Warren is building an anti-crypto army. So there is a clear opposite side to, as always there is within DC. So the likelihood of her garnering enough firepower, and I'll talk about some of the firepower that was laid out in some of the committee hearings last week. But do you feel that Senator Warren is in a position to wage a true crypto army against what we've seen here from what seems to be a pro-crypto house? What are your thoughts?
So I'd say that SBF and FTX really did a number here in DC. Given the fact that he was so present on Capitol Hill, I've never seen a CEO, not in financial services, but ever as a Hill staffer, come to the Hill as much as SBF did. And I would run into him personally on the Hill when I was lobbying folks on the House and Senate side. He would always be there. And he really has a bad taste in a lot of folks' mouths from the donations, the fraud, and everything. So I think we're seeing Elizabeth Warren and some of the skeptics in Congress emboldened because they're saying, look, I was telling folks this is all a scam or funny money, and SBF proved that. I think we're seeing that also with Binance right now. We're seeing a lot of folks in Congress, even on the pros crypto side, saying, here's a bad actor, in our opinion. They have no compliance program. So they're going after them as well. So I think, at least in Congress right now, the anti-crypto skeptics, they are having a moment right now where they're saying, look, I told you so. And we're seeing that also from the administration in some recent reports as well. But at the same time, I'm not sure it's going to be a good strategy in terms of votes as well as political power here to be so anti-crypto. I mean, we know that there's a lot of folks, millions who utilize cryptocurrency every single day, especially the younger generation. That's a pretty big gamble to say I'm against an entire industry sector that millions participate in. So we'll see if it works out to her favor. But politically, I just do not see the benefit of making such an all-out war on a certain industry.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think, the scenario with FTX, and even if you look at Binance in general, outside of Binance US, but Binance as a whole, which is the governing body, all of these have been corporations and entities that are outside the United States. Now, granted, they're having their quasi, access to U.S. citizens, but the point is that in many cases, regulation and how that might apply, I can't necessarily see that as a big deal, considering that even though FTX was the biggest implosion in a small puddle, it's nothing in comparison to what we're seeing now within our own banking system as it exists with publicly traded bank systems that are right here in the United States. So I don't know, this is going to be interesting. One of the other things that I wanted to notice was the characters that seem to be showing up more and more. This is actually Hillary Allen. Now, we reported on Hillary Allen last week when we did a breakdown of the committee, and it was basically McHenry and several House reps that were basically going head to head, and then you had the Filecoin team there giving data against this. But again, This person seems to be showing up. What gives her the credibility to represent the anti-crypto side of things? How are they pulling these experts out of the hat?
So each political party, if they're in power, gets to choose the witnesses, and then the minority party usually only gets one witness. So in this case, the Democrats, the Maxine Waters staff, they chose Hillary Allen to be the crypto skeptic, whereas the Republicans chose, to your point, the Filecoin, as well as Blockchain Capital and the other witnesses at that hearing. So that's kind of behind the scenes. That's what happens here. Now, Hillary Allen, to her point, I think there are a lot of folks saying that she's a very credible source. She has a good background, and especially in academia as well. We've seen a lot of folks really gravitate towards academia because there's a view that they have a non-biased view. I tend to disagree with that personally, but I think we're seeing the same reemergence of characters because they have experience testifying in front of Congress. They're well-spoken, so they can articulate their points pretty quickly. But also, candidly, too, the staff and members of Congress know where their positions are. It's very, very clear.
Right.
And that's why we do see a regurgitation of witnesses because it's they know exactly kind of where they are position-wise on policy. So I wouldn't be shocked to see Lee Rayner's again from Duke University. We'll probably see Hillary Allen testifying again beforehand. But at the same time, we'll see folks like Coin Center testifying. Van Balken did a great job. So I think we're going to see some reemergence of other folks testifying. But that's a standard playbook here at DC.
I was looking at McHenry's. He's the chair on these hearings, and just looking through here to see if there's any additional hearings and/or scenarios, and it doesn't look like there's anything, at least in the coming months. What is the likelihood of us seeing some additional activity from, the House and/or just general in DC that is starting to bring this back up? When would be the next big date, other than I think it's the May 8th or May 10th date for this one that's coming up right now?
Correct. So usually they do plan these things about a month in advance, and they let folks publicly know, usually a couple weeks ahead of time, what the hearing schedule looks like. So for right now, at least at the current moment, May 10th is the big one. Again, that's a joint hearing. That's a second iteration of the market structure hearing. That's really important because, again, they're working on legislation on this. So this is a very substantive hearing. And then at the same time, we did have technically a hearing on stablecoin legislation. We had a full draft. I mentioned that there's two competing drafts right now. McHenry's behind both of those efforts. But one's also with Maxine Waters at one point. And so there's a chance we could see votes on the stablecoin bill, for example, because it's pretty baked. Whereas the market structure, we haven't seen any public text been released. No principles have been released by either side. So I think that's why we're seeing more hearings on that topic, because they're still trying to figure out what to put in this legislation. So there is a lot of work happening behind the scenes, which is really exciting because, again, we've been asking for crypto legislation for quite some time to be moving forward. And right now, the farthest it's gone, candidly, in terms of hearings and legislation drafts. And I think we're going to see votes actually pretty soon. And soon in Congress could be a couple months, but I think we're seeing in at least the next 6 months, we're going to probably at least have a vote in the House on a crypto legislation, likely stable coins, but we could also see market structure come together as well. And I know McHenry has publicly said he wants to get that done sometime this summer. So it's an ambitious timeline, but we'll see if that happens. But keep focused on the House. The House is where the action is at least in the current moment.
Ron, have you seen any of the House members start to understand how projects could possibly assist with some of the existing problems within DC? You think about Ticketmaster, which is a big problem. You look at even the things around AI provenance, which could also flow into blockchain solutions. Then you look at even the most recent thing like the Writers Guild strike, which could eventually get into streaming royalties, much like what NFTs have done. All those solutions or problems have solutions that could exist in blockchain. Have any of the lawmakers started to look at, wait a minute, we're getting ready to regulate on something that creates innovation that could solve a lot of problems that exist in DC today?
We have a lot of members of Congress now who actually know this industry pretty well. The education efforts from folks at the Blockchain Associates like us. We also have a lot of individual companies, again, Coinbase being one of the primary ones, but Stellar and Ledger and several other folks are actively engaging here in DC, talking about the various different facets of the industry, whether it be DeFi, stablecoins, exchanges, and what have you. The main thing we keep hearing, though, is use cases. And when they say use cases, they want usually non-financial use cases. And that's why NFTs, especially on the Democrat side of the aisle, they really gravitate towards that. There was a non-financial use case, a lot of empowerment to artists, and that really resonated with a lot of folks, again, on the left mostly. And so I think we're still waiting for, there was a moment actually where Jake Auchincloss from Massachusetts last year he commented that crypto needs its ChatGPT. It needs to have that retail-facing explosion. And
Right.
while I disagree a little bit in terms of there's no use case or there's no explosion here that's really gone to the retail side, I still think we have a lot of members of Congress saying, what is the purpose of this still? And that's, I think, again, unfortunately, FTX really soured the well a little bit on that front. Folks are saying, it's been 10 years, where are the use cases? You and I both know there's plenty of them out there, financial and non-financial, but delivering that message can be sometimes difficult.
Well, I think the use case is starting to play out right in front of us, which is the flight of capital from small and regional banks. People are starting to look for new zones. Some of it's going into crypto by smart individuals, investors, business owners, now starting to figure out they can do something with crypto as opposed to just setting it into these money markets. So, and obviously you look at Bitcoin and its accelerant for the year, way up on the year to date. This gets to me the alternative, which is, I think, maybe also a little bit concerning for Capitol Hill and more importantly for just lawmakers in general, because the likelihood of an alternative financial system, which is already playing out globally, instantaneous transfer, moving from country to country, cross-borderless payments, all of these kinds of implementations, and then you have a banking system that's starting to meet some difficult challenges. That to me, I feel like, okay, the gate just opened up to show you a good example of why and how this could be used. I want to jump to this DAME tax that's being proposed, making crypto miners pay for costs that they impose on others. Now, the new proposal, I'll zoom in on this a little bit in case you can't see it. The budget, digital assets, mining energy, DAME tax. It's an example of the president's commitment of addressing both national and standing challenges around emerging risks on economic and environmental costs of these practices, mining. Now, when you look at all of this, Bitcoin wasn't mentioned in this write-up at all, and I'm concerned that is Bitcoin getting lumped into crypto mining as a whole? We're already seeing the potential for GPU mining that's going to go into Web3. We'll see that in things like Render, which is already starting to work into utilization in all sorts of things, including AI. That's going to explode. AI itself, I'm kind of concerned that the GPU power that's going to be needed to just operate the AI engines around the world may dwarf what we're seeing in this space. Anything playing out in DC where they're starting to say, all right, Bitcoin falls in this bucket and the rest of crypto and NFTs fall in this bucket in terms of the aspect of environmental impact?
I'll say, at least in this administration, the environment is one of the key talking points, as well as one of the key policy priorities for the Biden administration. And so anything that these progressive groups, these environmental groups are really spinning up, they tend to listen a lot. And right now, a lot of the focus from folks like the Sierra Club and others is on Bitcoin mining. We're seeing that play out in the States. We're seeing it play out. Sometimes folks in the industry are funding these efforts to go after Bitcoin mining, candidly. But at the same time, it's really resonating with Democrats, especially saying, we don't like the environmental cost and toll of this. It doesn't matter if it's renewables or if it's not. We believe it's costing too much energy here. And again, mostly focusing on Bitcoin. To your point, they are able to usually dissect the two. Sometimes it doesn't come out in the reports, but at least in our conversations, they are able to dissect the two. But in the argument that we don't like how you're utilizing energy, again, we had this play out in New York recently where we were going up against groups like the winery manufacturers, for example, which is a really odd group to be lobbying against crypto. But there was an argument saying we don't like how much energy they're using. Therefore, we're going to go after and target this one particular industry. And I think it's pretty unfair, candidly, until you say, well, we don't trust that one industry, so therefore we're going to target it explicitly. But all these other ones, they're fine with us. Again, you mentioned AI. That's actually come up a couple of times that really folks are realizing how much energy utilizes for AI, ChatGPT, and others. So we'll see how this plays out. I want to stress, though, it's just a proposal. It still has to go through Congress. We have plenty of ways to kill this effort. But they are candidly picking up a lot of folks in this fight here. Again, mostly on the left here, but even in, say, Texas, for example, we're seeing Republicans leading legislation against crypto mining. So it's coming from both sides here.
Well, I think the solution is going to be a scenario where a lot of these chains start to put up their own kind of carbon footprint, so to speak. If you look at Solana, they did this footprint overview on their total number of validators, et cetera, and then they go into all the comparative scale of the Solana footprint. The reason I say that is because we're probably going to look at a lot of different chains out there that are operating, whether you look at Ethereum or Avalanche, Solana, Algorand, you could name a lot of these tier ones that are doing a really great work. And then maybe even to a certain extent, possibly a consortium of Bitcoin miners that start to show the alternative energy that's being used to help mine Bitcoin, which is, if you compare that to the actual use case scenario of what's happening around the world, whether it's data centers, other types of mining themselves, even all the way into just what we're seeing in the newspaper industry just to print the New York Times. So there's quite a bit of impact around all these scenarios. Do you think that as a blockchain association, in having the kind of the connection to all these companies, being able to maybe present a report, do you guys do anything like that as far in terms of an industry carbon footprint report showing chains and what levels and comparative to other industries?
We do so when it comes to folks like Solana, which is a member of the Blockchain Association, we do go with them on Capitol Hill into regulators, showcasing their stats, for example. But individual change by numbers, not specifically. We work with those companies though, saying, hey, look, this is a priority for this administration. It's important to show the carbon footprint. And for folks in the Bitcoin mining space, we're saying, look at the innovations that you are providing, like using methane flaring, for example, at Crusoe. And many others, like burning tires. Like I heard that one recently. They're utilizing old tires and burning them in North Carolina to mine Bitcoin. And that's some pretty unique innovation, and it's really exciting. And again, the environmental toll is slim to none in these cases. And so we're coming to folks in the White House, especially saying, look, there are a lot of ways that you're utilizing renewables or you're utilizing zero footprint whatsoever here. So that's exciting to see. Again, but the main part, unfortunately, is the narrative that is winning is it's environmentally really taxing, especially Bitcoin mining, and we need to clamp that down. And we're rebutting that in every way, saying, look, just because you're targeting one industry, that's unfair. To your point, these data centers are costing a lot of energy tolls too. And so it's very, we got to warn folks, especially those industries that are targeting Bitcoin mining in the lobbying front, saying, because you're going for one industry, it's going to be very quickly, it can turn on you. So you got to be careful when you ask for selective advantages here.
Yeah, here's my question. Do you think that them flipping the script on, let's say they go with an ESG market or model to combat what's happening in the mining industry, and we see mining go offshore again? We already see or saw it vacate China for many of the same reasons. But if it vacates, does it present any kind of global security threat? When you look at Bitcoin in general, of having it starting to concentrate in one area of the world, potentially somewhere like Kazakhstan or maybe Eastern Europe, or possibly maybe back into the Pacific Rim. Do you think our lawmakers are worried about the rest of the world building up in an asset such as Bitcoin or other aspects in crypto based on us governing our laws so tightly it pushes innovation offshore?
It's funny because we're governing, we're pretty restrictive on the mining front, but at the same time, we're not providing the regulatory clarity for a lot of these token projects that aren't, necessarily Bitcoin, for example, to launch their projects. And so a lot of folks, we actually developed a report, had a great a report recently saying that we've went from 54% of developers to 29% in the past 5 years.
Right.
Developers are going offshore. Actually, it was a consensus with a bunch of developers, and there was a running joke within the groups of starting projects in the United States because they didn't want to. They said that the rules are unclear, and they're afraid the SEC is going to come after them. Exactly. And they're going to France, Portugal, UK, these places that are very heavily regulated, but at the same time, because they provide clarity. And that's the main issue here, why legislation is so important. We need to have that clarity. And finally, to Bitcoin mining in particular, there's a lot of jobs created from this, especially folks like Rockdale, Texas, where there was an abandoned plant. Jobs have left that town, and Bitcoin mining revitalized that actually. We've seen several thousand jobs come back, and actually the local economy really thriving in an area that really hadn't a lot of economic development in quite some time. Actually, it was more of a recession. And so we're seeing these small towns, these small areas really actually gravitate towards Bitcoin mining for economic development purposes. And I think it's really exciting, especially when you're utilizing renewables and many other innovations in the mining space. But it's unfortunate our policymakers are still viewing this, the pretty big sledgehammer in terms of one industry, one sect of the industry.
Right.
But at the same time, not provide that clarity for a lot of the rest of the industry who wants to comply with the laws. Again, they're not trying to skirt regulations. They want regulations.
Yeah, and I think that's the concern I have, in covering the industry from a global standpoint. I mean, most of our audience is outside the United States, and we're starting to see more and more innovation being pushed offshore. To me, as an American, I just look at it and I think, because I lived through Silicon Valley, worked in Silicon Valley with Microsoft, and I saw the innovation that Silicon Valley pretty much put the United States on the map in terms of the titan of tech. That may not necessarily be the case in the next decade. We could see new centers of technology that are either birthed through AI or birthed through blockchain that really could change things for sure. With that being the case, we did a crypto scorecard on one of the hearings with Gary Gensler. It was in reference to kind of his overreach. And we kind of put a pro-crypto, we weren't sure list, and then an anti-crypto. And I'm showing this, obviously we see McHenry, Wagner, Hill, Velasquez, Sessions, etc. I'm going to leave that up there for you to look at for a second. And if you could tell me, when you look at that particular list, let me kind of pop this out a little bit. Is there anybody on this list that you feel are the champions that our industry needs to reach out to, let them know that we have constituent support? And are there others that could be swayed? Like, for instance, the big yellow question marks. There's so many that they really didn't go one way or the other.
It's a great list, by the way, and it's mostly all accurate here. I think, first off, folks in Congress listen to their constituents, their voters. So it doesn't really help when you reach out to Brad Sherman if you don't live in California in his district.
Right.
The staffer had to respond to a lot of those emails. Those always get filtered out because you don't live in that district. So I'd say always, regardless of where these members are on this list or not, always reach out to your member of Congress that represents you, because they will listen, and there is staff and the member that has to respond to you and listen as well. So. So some of the key power players are, at least in Congress, it comes down to seniority a lot. And so McHenry, for example, he's very senior and important. But Waters, on the other end, is very senior as well on the Democrat side. A lot of folks listen to her, and it has ripple effects for the rest of the folks down dais. So there's some other key power players here too. Jim Himes is a good example, actually. He's from Connecticut.
Okay.
I would say he's anti-crypto. He's actually on the Intelligence Committee, very focused on national security, very focused on clamp down money laundering, both in crypto and outside of it. So he's a really powerful player on the Democrat side. Even though they're minority, a lot of folks do listen to him. He's a really sharp man, from Rhodes Scholar and everything. And I've seen him personally actually come a long ways from crypto skeptic to understand the technology. And I think also, to your point about constituents here, DCG is based out near his district. And so that's jobs, that's voters. And so there also is that tie as well. So it's very important to reach out to your individual member of Congress and show why it's important to you. And again, it depends the argument, which party you're talking to largely, but jobs are always important. And that's something that really resonates with members of Congress, because they want to keep those jobs in their districts.
Yeah, Ron, I'm just questioning in reference of the lobbying. You look at the funding that's going to have to be in the industry to kind of help this go forward. I look at the size of this industry. It's a little over $1 trillion market. You look at the U.S. companies, now you're starting to shrink into the hundreds of millions. What do you feel is going to be the case from what it will take from a lobbying standpoint to really combat this through the next decade? Is this going to be multi-millions, hundreds of millions? What's this going to look like from a lobbying standpoint?
I remember being a Hill staffer, and there were maybe 2 lobbyists who were dealing with this issue back in 2017, 2018. And again, folks at Coin Center were able to get me as a staffer and several members of Congress up to speed on what crypto is, answering all the dumb questions I had when I was still learning the policy of the technology as well. That has changed now. And actually, what's really exciting is that we're going toe-to-toe with the bank lobby, who outspends us by hundreds of millions. And we're beating them. We're beating them on the stablecoin front. Sometimes we combine forces with them. There's a staff accounting bulletin 121. It deals with basically crypto on balance sheets for banks. But we're joining forces with the banks there. So sometimes we have some weird partners that we lobby with or against. But at the same time, it's good to see the industry finally realize the importance of DC. I know lobbying comes with a term, but this is what moves the needle here. Education, lobbyists are more educators here, especially when it comes to wanting regulation. Sometimes folks hire lobbyists to get out of regulation, but in this case, we're actually lobbying for regulation. And so I do think we still need some more folks, candidly. We always appreciate, whether they're part of the Blockchain Association or other associations or none associations. We always work together. I spend half my time talking to either colleagues or also other lobbyists and coordinating. So we're all on the same team here, at least on the crypto lobbying side. We all want the same thing, some more than others in certain areas, but it's good to see the industry finally realize what DC needs a lot of education, and they need to hire folks who know how to navigate it. And again, we've gotten successful wins, and we've gone toe-to-toe with some of the toughest lobbies. And even at some point, we've had some of the crypto skeptics say the crypto lobby is very powerful, when sometimes it was just a matter of 5 or 6 of us really taking down things like the infrastructure bill for a little bit. So always appreciate more.
Well, I mean, if you're going against the banking system, not against, but you're trying to get, obviously FaceTime and get attention from what's happening with lawmakers. I mean, without saying it, this sounds to me like tens of millions of dollars into a lobbying organization that really needs to move the needle going forward. With that being, and that's me saying that, not you, obviously, but let me hit on this point, and that is this statement that we've heard around the industry quite a bit, and that is, legislation by enforcement versus actually having clear legislation. You look at what's happening right now with the just the SEC's enforcement or attempted enforcement here on Coinbase. They've got this new issue coming in where Coinbase has basically 10 days to reply. Now, maybe this is good, maybe this is not good, I'm not sure, or maybe there's going to be something then come out of this. And then you've got Ripple and Coinbase's top lawyers now holding a discussion to kind of coordinate this. So to me, this is unprecedented. I see this in many industries. I've been around business and tech, was in the throes of the antitrust lawsuit with Microsoft and the government, and got a chance to see a lot. I've never seen this before, where you have entities starting to merge together, or not merge, but work together in this. How do you think this plays out for both Ripple and Coinbase?
So like I said, in DC, we are all on the same team together. So anytime I see groups or individual companies try to attack other crypto companies, we try to knock it off and say, hey, look, we got bigger forces to play with here. And I think we're seeing that in the Coinbase and Ripple side. So I think that coordination is important, but it still has a long way to go. And back to your point about legislation versus regulation by enforcement, the courts are playing a big role now. Like I said, we still have major court cases with Ripple and Grayscale. If Coinbase gets sued, I'm sure they'll sue back at the SEC. But when it goes into the courts, it's a lot harder of a process. It's a little more opaque. It comes down to usually the judge and the appeals subsequent afterwards. Whereas legislation, at least there's a way for stakeholders to craft and work with policymakers on coming up with what a good framework looks like, or what stablecoin regulation looks like, or what have you. It's a lot more transparent of a process. There's votes, there's a committee process and such. And so I always urge folks, look, legislation is probably the most transparent way to engage policymakers and to see what a framework should look like. And we'll have a balanced approach of industry, consumer groups, academia, and several other folks' opinions weigh in. But at the same time, that's also a lot more final than in case of like the courts, where it could take years. I mean, the Ripple case is a great example of how long that's taken. And so if we wait for several years for court cases to finalize and legislation does not happen, the innovation flight that we mentioned earlier is only going to grow, and we're missing it.
Yeah, who would you say right now is the proponents for CBDC in DC? Because if you look at what's happening here in Florida, where we're based, Florida's legislator now, near unanimous vote, approves a CBDC ban. So the potential of a CBDC being implemented, obviously here in a republic of the United States, not a democracy, but a republic, where states still have pull on their own citizens. Who's driving this from the DC side? What lobby is pushing this?
There's a little bit of the bank lobby, not entirely, but there is a little bit of the bank lobby pushing for a CBDC in some elements. Again, more on the wholesale side, not more on the retail side.
Right.
But also at the same time, I think we've seen a lot more of the progressive groups, MMT, sometimes some of these academia professors are really advocating for this. They're the same folks who advocated for the post office to be the branch for banks and banking with the government and such. And those things, they've been existing since the 1930s, actually. And it has not gained traction. And Capitol Hill, even when all Democrats have all parties of power, they said, we're not advancing this. So I think they pivoted from postal banking and Fed accounts now to a central bank digital currency. Again, and then there are some merits in some of these arguments too, saying, look, China and other adversaries are digitizing their currency and moving forward. But at the same time, we've seen the situation with the Canadian truckers where their bank accounts were shut off. Rightfully so, it has really scared folks. So that debate's still occurring. Again, I think there's two dichotomies here. We have the wholesale CBDC, and then we have the retail CBDC. and a lot of folks are more focused on the retail side. And that's, again, rightfully so in some cases, but I think it's still an argument that's going to be playing out for quite some time. But I think actually I had an article today actually in CoinDesk with Emily Parker, and I think it's going to become a presidential issue. I mean, we've already, to your point, Ron DeSantis has already talked about it. Ted Cruz has been talking about it, a lot of figureheads in the more the Republican side, but it's going to be coming up. And again, we're not seeing too much of a pro-CBDC on the members of Congress right now. It's more just we're still experimenting, we're still learning and still studying because it's a big step, and that's good enough. That's how good policy we made. We should make sure we have studies and understand the costs and benefits of such.
Yeah. What's your message to not only people that are watching our show that are individual retail investors? Here in the United States, they're pretty much being cut off from almost every angle right now for access to the industry. We can't do any sort of derivatives. There's no shorting. There's none of that the rest of the world gets a chance to basically pounce on in terms of opportunity. What are the things that we can do as individuals, company owners, right now to help this message go forward?
There's a couple avenues here. So I'll put a plug in for the Blockchain Association. Coinbase is working with us on a GitHub fundraising round. Like I mentioned, again, lobbying and policy are incredibly important just for education purposes. Again, we're asking for regulation. We need to have policymakers educated. So that's one way to do it. Another way is to support members of Congress who are pro-crypto or you believe have a great message on the Republican and Democrat side of the aisle. So campaign contributions are always important as well. I know that's an area that was that's really picked up. SBF has really scared folks away because on that side, but that's important to keep the folks that have been good in Congress. It's important to keep them there. And then finally, it's a small outreach to your individual member of Congress who represents you, senators, as well as your member in the House. These are important people who do have staff, who do read these emails. Again, I personally read thousands as a staffer, and I have friends who did the same thing as well. Getting that message across is really important. And so we're seeing consumers are going to be harmed if we don't have legislation in place. We're seeing that right now with the FTX situation. It's important to have A, these companies here, but B, to protect consumers to make sure we know, guardrails and what businesses can and can't do.
Very cool. Ron Hammond coming to us from the Blockchain Association there in DC. Great to have you back on the show. Thanks for stopping in today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate it.
You bet. All right, so you guys are tuned in. Maybe over on the podcast side of things, make sure and jump in over here on the YouTube channel. This is where a lot of our additional content go, but really if you want to one-up everything and front-run the entire market, the way to do that is to get in on our Diamond Circle. The Diamond Circle has additional podcasts, research, all the things that we do here, and spend hundreds of hours, man-hours per week, really diving into the deep stuff here for you guys. So just jump in on the link down below. Of course, if you want to reach me, it's out there on Twitter, @Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.